Good morning to those joining us from the US, afternoon to Europe, and a very good evening to our guests in Asia. I'm Michael Lawrence. Welcome to Digital China, COVID-19 and Emerging Tech Trends, a conference produced by Asia House in partnership with the Chong Kong Graduate School of Business, CKGSB. The COVID-19 crisis has accelerated the digitalization of the global economy. Nowhere is that more evident than in China. Indeed, there's evidence to suggest that China is well ahead of the digital curve, at least in some sectors. The massive rise in online retail, triggered by the lockdowns and restrictions on movement, has seen a change in consumer patterns in China and a rapid adoption of new technologies, from live streaming to social commerce and more. The digital economy is a focus of the Chinese government as well. President Xi Jinping has announced that the government will invest something like $1.4 trillion over the next 6 years to accelerate the development of homegrown technology from 5G to artificial intelligence. Well, in today's session, we will explore the emerging digital trends in China and look closely at how consumer habits and operating models are changing. Well, I'm delighted to be joined by Professor Sun Baohong, Dean's Distinguished Chair Professor of Marketing for CKGSB Americas, Anita Huang, Operating Partner and Chief Marketing Officer, Sonovation Ventures, Deborah Campbell, Chief Operating Officer, Accenture Greater China, and John Artman, Technology Editor for the South China Morning Post. In a moment, I'll invite each of our speakers to make some opening remarks to frame today's discussion, and then we'll move to Q&A. And we very much welcome your involvement in today's session. If you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, let me know via the hand wave icon on the bottom of your screens or via the chat box. I'll be pleased to bring you into the conversation. But to get us underway, I would like to invite Professor Sun from our partners CKGSB to brief us on changing consumer habits in China and the resulting new digital trends. Professor Sun.
Thank you, Michael, and thank CKGSB and Asia House to put together this event. We couldn't find a better time to talk about this digital trends in China and in the global kind of world. And I'm going to share, I put together some slides. I think probably it's easier for me to share some numbers and examples. Okay. Is it showing? Okay.
Yes, not full screen, but we do have it. We can see it.
Okay.
Yes, you're there now. That works.
Great. Perfect. Yeah. Okay. So, so basically, the first thing, while I was looking through the news and articles, first thing that made me interested is to find out, go behind the door of Chinese people during the lockdown period and find out what they're buying. Okay, so in January, they're buying all the necessities produced. And then in February, started to buy baking tools and food containers and audio video. They start some little bit entertaining. And then in March and April, it's when some people go back to work, it's office supplies and e-bike to keep them safe. And in May, when things are start to recover a little bit, it's outdoor items. And they are also looking for kind of a home gym so they can exercise and something that is comfortable to make their life at home more comfortable, like silk quilts, and they buy things for pets. So those means that consumers' consumption behaviors are changing. So, and then we were interested in knowing like what type of consumption habit will persist. It's going to likely to stay after 2020. And of course, online shopping, that's a huge thing that is going to stay with people. Even though during the pandemic, the retail dropped by 20%, but online shopping increased by 8.6% during the pandemic. And all those online kind of digital platforms, they received tons of, enjoyed huge increase of the sales increase. And also consumers adopting more healthy lifestyle, and they're not talking about luxury, they're talking about necessity product, comfort product, or even financial and insurance products. So they're shifted to more safe mode. And but a little bit slow in returning to brick and mortar retailers, even though the government is issuing kind of vouchers and doing festivals, but still they're a little bit cautious. Another thing is that now stuck at home, they're looking for social media to get connected with the people, have a little bit of entertainment, and they want to influence each other, like what kind of a product to shop online. Another thing, important thing is that in China, during the lockdown, most of the young people, when they were working at the first tier, second tier cities, now they're going back home and to join their parents in third tier and fourth tier cities. So because they're tech savvy and most of the family decisions are made by these young people. So I'm very interested in observing in the future, what's the implication on brand choices and the consumption behavior. So we're going to see in the next 1 or 2 years. And then I was looking at the corporate world, the business world. So most of the traditional business, they are facing a tough time. But there are two types of business that they are growing during this period of time. Number one is the tech companies. Their DNA is kind of a digital, like a ByteDance, like the Fresh People, Hema. They are enjoying soaring online food orderings and last mile delivery. Another group of traditional brands, manufactured retailers that survived, that are resilient to the pandemic, are digitally transformed brands, like Perfect Diary, right? They quickly make up, turn makeup artists on the online, from offline store to the online stores, and they increase their sales. So China also benefits from this new internet infrastructure that is promoted by the government. So because behind the scenes, the smart manufacture, smart supply chain, and smart logistics during the crisis really make sure consumers live a comfortable life and avoid them from stocking up all the toilet papers. So that's something China benefits from the digitalization. And in the retail side, there are several trends that sounds very interesting. So now a lot of offline functions are brought online. So before, the online channels are viewed as a sales channel, but now more and more like showrooming, consulting services are moved from offline to online. So like live streaming, like virtual showrooms and virtual services and consulting, that helps bring consumers to choose the brands and sell more of those products. Another interesting trend here is that localization, local community, offline local community, and last mile kind of a living circle become more important again. So this small fulfillment center, neighborhood purchases, community buying is keeping people safe. So those are the new retail trends, and also cross-border e-commerce were booming during this pandemic period. And live streaming, like Michael mentioned, live streaming, social commerce are becoming very, very important, not only for local brands, but for international brands. So every day there are like 30,000 live streaming kind of accounts were opened in China. So that includes lots of multinational brands. For example, this Canadian kind of a fashion brand, Ports, in a 9-hour live discussion, kind of a live streaming, they attracted 1.3 million customers and enjoyed 1.4 million sales. So it's very effective in China. And also, at the broader scale, there are lots of new industries are booming. I'm sure my colleagues here have a lot to say. One is remote work. In China, this DingTalk. It's like a WeChat, but it's for work. So far, this WeChat with DingTalk provided by kind of a Tencent is occupying a majority of people's kind of social media time. It is like providing all the functions. And telemedicine, this Ping An Good Doctors, they provided a consultant platform, attracted lots of telemedicine and a consultant. And lots of hospitals in China enjoy the 5G for a lot of kind of CT scan diagnosis. Even robot is trying to treat people and nursing. Long distance, one thing is always big in China, but during pandemic, this cross-border platform become very, very prominent, like a VIP Kids, which employs a lot of like English-speaking people from United States, Middle West, and then teach Chinese kids English. And then Wukong is another stop doing the opposite. They hire a lot of people from China to teach kids from overseas Chinese. Okay, so those are some examples and my observations I collected and shared with everybody. So in the future, smart city, 3D, robotics, drone, data center, cognitive computing, AI, all is going to be discussed and it's going to emerge in the landscape. Yeah, back to you, Michael. Thank you.
Professor, thank you very much indeed. Look, lots to cover there, but I want to now move on to the AI issue in particular. And Anita Wang, I'd imagine that the explosion of apps, a whole bunch of new apps, and the availability of even more data means that this could potentially accelerate the development of AI in China. Is that your reading of it?
Yes, exactly. Professor Sun gave a very colorful and very vibrant growth that we saw from the pandemic. And even before the pandemic, I would say since the rise of mobile internet, China pretty much surpassed a lot of things. For example, China actually had very low credit card penetration rate historically, and it's now the most penetrated mobile payment market. And China used to be kind of, a lot of people still think a lot of commerce, we're doing offline transactions, but now everything is moving online. So what we saw is just by reading and hearing from what Professor Sun provided us, you can imagine at the back end of all the apps, all the services, all the applications that people are consuming, that indicates, actually more time online and higher frequency online. So our kids are taking classes and we are working from home. So our life is has been forced to be digitally transformed within a short time. And with that, actually, what we are reading as a tech investor in China is all these activities, some of them have been online or semi-offline, had been actually moved to online and generating data day to day. And the volume of all the activities online are generating data back to the platforms. So as many of us understand that AI performs the best and AI trains the best with massive amount of data. So we do see that pandemic and the digitalization, accelerated digitalization actually provides further fuel to our next wave of AI applications. So I would quote a research from PwC that AI would be generating an additional 15.7 trillion GDP to global economy by 2030. And actually, when we see the general business, currently the AI application penetration rate is still below 10%, still somewhere between 5 to 10, according to different research. So there is a lot headroom to grow for business to start embrace AI applications and transform their business in more efficient operational way.
Okay, Anita, thanks very much. Deborah Campbell, I want to come to you now. And what are you hearing from your clients? Apart from anything else, it's very clear that the pandemic has driven companies to accelerate their digital plans. And if they haven't, they're unlikely to succeed, certainly in the near to medium term.
Yes, thank you. I hope you can hear me well enough. We've been tracking digital transformation of companies in China for about the last 3 years through a structured program. And luckily, we just did the recent one post-COVID. I think what we're finding with companies is actually two separate sets, is the digital champions, which invested significantly, rotated their business, and people that maybe invested in the front end, so the online sales channels, the marketing thing, but some structural things in their organization are not connected, such as their supply chains, customer insight, the artificial intelligence, how to change to customer needs, how to be competitive on the pricing. And this is causing actually a bigger gap. So there are what we would call the digital champions that are out there. They invested ahead of the curve and are really taking market share. And they are responding quicker to the post-COVID world than the digital laggards. So, and the challenge for the digital laggards is that they're not getting the market share, and they're getting conflicting needs for cash. So what do they now do with their cash choices? They don't have as much income coming in. They know that they need to join up their back-end services, things that weren't deemed to be important. So the big thing was always get online, get the share. But actually it's some fundamentals of business that has now been exposed in COVID. What is my supply chain? Who owns the supply chain? Where is it? Can we guarantee delivery? Things like that. Organization innovation is another area where we think too many of the Chinese companies need to actually adopt a different organization mindset. Too many of them are still very hierarchical. They need to be much flatter and more nimble and be more open to innovation. So yes, we saw huge online demand, but there's going to be winners and losers in this new digital transformation. And I think the COVID-19 exposed companies that have really not addressed all of the foundational parts of what they need to do as a company to get the full value chain. And we see big announcements really recently with like Ali recently just disclosing that it's going to go into manufacturing, right? So it's seeing the need for this whole value from supply chain right through to customer. So I think COVID was great for the online champions, but now everybody else needs to catch up really fast. And there are some big fundamental questions that I think many Chinese companies need to address, which is technology, organization, the use of AI, and agile innovation, which for many of the SOEs, POE and SOE combinations is going to be radically different in how they operate going forward.
Deborah, thanks. Much to explore there, and I do want to get onto that, especially some of the organizational shifts that you think need to happen with Chinese companies. But John Artman, let me come to you now. In your view, is China been better at embracing the digital change triggered by the COVID-19 pandemic, the economic benefits as well as the social benefits?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting, a lot of what the previous speakers have mentioned, especially when it comes to a lot of these post-pandemic trends. In China, at least, I mean, these are actually trends that were existing already. Live streaming, e-commerce, short video, grocery delivery, community buying, all this stuff already existed pre-pandemic. But really what we've seen is that the pandemic has spurred increased demand for these services. And then, of course, the technology companies in particular have done an amazing job of responding to that demand. And that's one of the really interesting things I think about kind of overall, if you look at kind of the macro level, especially in terms of policy, but then also looking at, the role of technology in China, is that, one of the reasons that technology adoption has been so rapid over the last decade or so in China is that these tech companies have done an amazing job of finding the pain points in everyday life and building up products and services to directly address those pain points. Grocery delivery is a great example. E-commerce is a great example. A lot of what they do and what they sell is just not available online. It's not available offline. And so what they've done is they built these online to offline platforms that really bridge the gap between what you can do online and then actually delivering products and services offline. And I think if you look at, again, from a policy perspective, I really do think that the Chinese government is, there's a lot to be said for how they've approached technology in general. I think that the government has done an amazing job of recognizing the power of technology, both of course on the consumer, but then also on the business side of things, where if you look at, traditionally China has been manufacturer of the world, but relatively low value. And we can see that much like Germany and their industrial policy, China has learned that actually, in order to continue to drive economic growth, and of course to better its position in the world, it has to really move up that value chain. And technology is a huge part of that. And so when we talk about the fourth industrial revolution, that's really what we mean, right? So AI and robotics applied to manufacturing, 5G, coming into the cities and onto the factory floor. And so I think that really what one of the amazing things about the China story is really it's this amazing leapfrog where the country and the society does not have the same legacy issues that the rest of the world has, in particular the West, where a lot of these industries are extremely mature. The incumbents are already dominant, although there is of course some disruption. But because of a very strict regulatory environment, I think kind of technophobia from the part of users is that, especially in the Western world, we don't see this kind of change that we've seen in China. And so looking forward, it's not surprising at all that these trends are accelerating. And I do think, however, and this is my last point, I do think, however, we need to be a little bit cautious when we're looking at China and trying to understand what China is doing and how we can apply it to the rest of the world. Because I do think the China context is extremely idiosyncratic, and I'm not quite sure how much of the success of technology, let's say, can be applied to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
John, thanks very much. Anita, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, actually, I want to echo John's point, also Deborah's. What it actually makes a good kind of framework. And as investors, we don't look at just what's happening now, because if it's already happening, it's already too late to invest. So we always see what's down there, say in terms of 5-year time frame. And what actually Professor Sun gave us is pretty much a consumer end driven innovations and acceleration of activities. However, we do feel that the consumer end innovations and the consumer end commerce and all the activities are reaching kind of a plateau. And to that, the consumer end innovation will continue to grow. However, there is limited headroom for it. And we feel that is actually at the junction of a paradigm shift, bringing that consumer end innovation to business end. For example, a consumer is demanding a lobster tomorrow, in Beijing, and Beijing is not near the sea even, meaning that the supply chain, the logistics, and its frozen chain needs to catch up to meet the consumer demand. And we already see that happening in the past few years. In order to catch up what the consumer demands are, business actually have to change and have to innovate and have to transform. And with consumer end innovation, much enabled by mobility and payment, the business end innovation would largely come from automation and AI and connectivity. So that's actually, we are looking at kind of the fundamental new enabling technology that would drive business transformation. And as Deborah pointed out, not all the business will be able to go through that. So actually in the 10, 15 deals that we just made after COVID, it's all about business transformation and automation. So there are definitely some selected and enlightened CEOs that are really embracing that and actually being kind of jumping on the wagon for it. So I just want to actually bring that out. We are seeing the trend moving from consumer end to business end. And there is going to be pioneers in the business end to drive that. So that's also an implication for the audience here.
Okay, Anita, thanks very much. I want to bring on Deborah on that because you're talking a lot about business transformation. There will be some winners and losers. So Deborah, is that what you're seeing, that this consumer demand is driving changes in business models and some are going to be left behind? What do those who don't want to be left behind need to do, and how rapidly?
I think they need to do a lot, right? Is what they need to do. And the issue is how to prioritize, because many of them, we've just published a document and we're sort of laying out 6 things really. One is on this customer point, coming up with different omni-channel games, right? Everybody has got the same. So how do you interact new with the customer? You've got to have much more control and resilient supply chains. You've actually got to have an IT system, which is much more adaptable under this banner of what we refer to as living systems. The point about data transparency and actually data architectures is huge. Having one source of the truth and how to use the data. Many companies have massive amounts of data, they're just not using it. And one thing that I think will be difficult, but is a basic, is a lot of Chinese companies really have to change into more of a flexible organization structure. So less hierarchical, much flatter, and actually have much more of a training program for making their people much more adaptable going forward, so that as roles change, they can change and actually allow agile innovation in the company. Too many companies that we work with, there's innovation going in at the bottom, but it almost has to go hierarchical up to the top, and that's too slow. So.
No, I don't think that's necessarily a COVID issue, though. I've seen that around for many, many years. Look, lots of questions, and I do want to come to the audience because they're queuing up. But Professor Sun, just before I do that, these consumer trends are driving changes to business models. You've outlined very succinctly the different trends as they emerged during that short period of COVID. Do you see any slowdown in those trends if and when we get to the point of vaccine and some sort of pre-COVID normal life returns?
I'm going to see the modification of the speed, but I think the trend will be there because it's consistent with the consumer's behavior as well as the business logic. And some of the things trend is probably true across country borders. So I was hearing the panelists were discussing. I agree with you that there are, in the past, a lot of innovation from China are on the seaside. And China is very good at doing business application of new technology, new business model. But moving forward, we see great opportunities for B-side innovation. China already have lots of people working on this solutions for digital transformation. So John was mentioning about, audience mentioned about what can the rest of the world learn from China. So I think that live streaming is not only because it's fancy, entertaining, it's because it's consistent with people's behavior. So I have nowhere facing the explosion of information, I need somebody to curate all the products, tell me what to buy. So that's a research stage of consumer decision journey. So that's why it's becoming a global phenomenon. Macy's, Nordstrom are all adopting that live streaming. Second is that we don't usually see, but probably Anita sees and Deborah sees a lot, is the delivery and logistics. China, many softwares are developed to make it seamless, kind of behind the scene, kind of there's a business chain and to support e-commerce. And the third is last mile delivery, which is a phenomenon in China. And in China, for example, Dada, a company, they use a crowdsourced business model, right? So quickly they crowdsource all those delivery things to regular people, students, retired people, and then they can deliver in real time. And so that's something very new, unique in China, but can be learned. Touchless technology was there in China, explored by Chinese entrepreneurs even before the pandemic. In the future, it's going to stay. And AI, Anita, this AI. So I'm a researcher, I study machine learning AI. Only for this topic, whenever I look at research articles, 70% are written by Chinese researchers. The algorithm they developed because China has the best data across 300 degrees of consumers' life. And they have the scale, they have the speed, so the AI is trained and they generate more unbiased answers. So those are the things. And I echo Deborah's points. In China, not only the organization, I think it's very important to change. There's another thing. China, different from other countries, is a manufacturing industry. So they do digitalization. Most of the kind of motivation is to sell their products. So sales-driven digitalization, probably in the future, we can learn more about how to better serve the consumers, improve quality, R&D, and improve the value and being globalized the brands. So maybe that's another thing to change the motivation of digitalization. Yes. Yeah.
Just before I go to the audience, John, I see you nodding furiously.
Yeah, sorry, I wanted to jump in. So I think, so what the other panelists have said, I think is amazing. And, I think that this is one of the things that I think is actually really easy for people outside of China to overlook. People even inside of China to overlook. Just because, there's a lot of innovation coming out of China doesn't mean necessarily that the companies themselves are innovative. I think that's a really important point. Really what the story of innovation in China has been, what happens when you take an extremely entrepreneurial culture and you put them and you take them kind of out of history and bring them into the present, where there's all this where there's the internet and there's mobile phones and smartphones, and you just let them loose, right? And so that's one of the big things about, I think that it's important to remember, is that the starting point for innovation in China has been extremely different. So it's been consumer driven, so driven by consumer demand. And it's been, as Professor Sun said, it's been sales driven as well. So really what we're seeing is this amazing commercialization of already existing technology. And I think also to the point of enterprise services, this is one of those things I think that, we're going to see a lot more of over the next maybe 1 or 2 decades, where, there is this, because really what it comes down to is that there wasn't really much need for efficiency in a lot of these businesses. But the cost of labor is rising, and the cost of doing business is rising, which means that these companies need some kind of software solutions. They can't rely on manual labor to do everything anymore. And so there's this huge opportunity for a lot of technology companies, I would say both tech majors and startups, to come in and provide enterprise services, which is really, really cool. So there's this kind of like, exchange going on where the rest of the world is learning from China in terms of on the consumer side and how to kind of upgrade their sales for the internet. And then China can also learn from the rest of the world, where enterprise services are actually very, very mature already.
Okay, great. Look, as I said, a queue of people to ask questions from the audience, so let's go to them now. I'm going to go to Ginny Yan of ICBC Standard, and following Ginny, Vizuki Shastri. So you won't see the individual, but you will hear them. So Ginny, your question, please.
Hi, thank you very much, Michael, and thank you, panelists and speakers. Very interesting conversation today. Maybe just a quick 3 points from my side. I'm a macroeconomist, so forgive me if I have become a little bit more economist about my views. But I think, a lot of what you said, particularly the consumption-led transformation in digital age, is actually, the digitalization, I guess, of China's policy-led, actually, from my perspective. It was initially policy-led. And obviously, all of these kind of startups, incubation, all of these, and even overseas, when you see Chinese investments in these overseas incubators, for example, some of that is policy-led. So my first point is the consumption-led thesis, I guess, is becoming much more apparent. But this is really a point about the structural changes happening within China. This is a consumption driving China's economy. We'll continue to see that. But a very important point to make here is about the dual circulation, where domestic consumption together with external is hugely important. So I think that's something to be said. And I noted one of your audience talked about aging. And this is the other point. I think Professor Sun talked about the population and actually they're using this technology. But I think one of the audience talked about youth, Chinese youth, a one-child policy, and actually the youth coming through that are much more digital. But in fact, in my observation, I think, regardless of age, people are using across the board digitization, digital methods, and that's a trend. And then lastly is this notion of SOEs and how they are using digitization. Well, to be frank, this is one of the ideas behind the mixed ownership strategy in China, ensuring that the private sector is also coming onto stream to having more of a say. So I think going forward, really, China's digital age really depends on how well the private sector investments work together with SOEs. And that really coming back to your point about how agile Chinese businesses are, well, it really depends on how the SMEs and private sectors are allowed to thrive and become much more of a driver of China's economy. So 3 points. I think one question maybe I have for the audience is really going forward. Clearly, we have, a US. I mean, this is the elephant in the room. Still very much dominating the technological innovation. And then, how do you see that panning out? I guess, particularly in the run-up to elections and continuing trade tensions between the two countries. Thank you, Michael.
So Jen, just to be clear, you're asking your question, you made a lot of very good points, thank you very much, is do you see the US still leading in innovation despite the disruption caused by election, or China overtaking? That's what I understood you to ask, is that right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Let me go to Anita first, because you're investing in new tech. What's your take?
Yeah, we are primarily China focused in our investment. Of course, we observe the trends very closely. I think in terms of just AI, kind of the verticals within AI, US is still leading in a lot of ways. For example, we all see the latest GPT-3 and its capability. Autonomous driving, the technology in US is probably still 1.5 to 2 years ahead. There are also new areas, definitely quantum. We are not really a biotech expert, but those are definitely areas that US is leading a lot. I think China, relatively speaking, is playing, I would say, it's fair to say China is catching up at the moment. We don't know whether China would be catching up or would already caught up in certain areas such as 5G, such as certain verticals that China is heavily investing and supported by policy. So I would say it's going to be interesting, especially with the current decoupling trend, that there will be areas US continue to excel, but I think it's worth to watch that there will be also areas that China start to rise. So definitely there are areas that we are paying close attention to.
Okay, Professor Sun, you're in the US, you're based in New York. Do you share Anita's view that the US is still probably ahead, 18 months or so, but there are areas where China can advance more rapidly?
Yeah, I think China is very innovative on the consumer side, application side, but fundamental kind of a breakthrough, and it's still dominated by United States. So in the research side and everything, the 5G, the basic logic behind AI is still developed here. But there's one thing I think maybe US can learn from China, okay, which is not about the consumer side. It's the ecosystem built by Chinese tech companies. So the ecosystem built by Tencent and Alibaba. So it's very consistent with the business logic to host the consumer decision journey. So you can look at Tencent. It's much, much more than Facebook or anything else. It's basically a platform that allows both brands and the consumers to hop on and interact with each other. So, and also the the Alibaba is also starting from your search until you pay, until you go to a store, until you ride a bike, whatever, it's all built on this ecosystem. I think that is something probably more than the application side. It's the ecosystem built by Chinese tech companies that is quite advanced.
Okay, thanks very much. I'll move on to the next question now, because as I said, we have a lot. We'll go to Vasuki Shastri, and after you, Vasuki, we'll go to Boon Kiat Teo from UOB. But Vasuki.
Thanks a lot, Michael. Very, very interesting discussion. The first question I had for the panel is really lessons from COVID-19, and how is digital transformation likely to transform the healthcare sector? What lessons have we learned where things have worked and things have not worked? And a broader macro question is, do we have a sense of the size of the digital economy in China and its contribution to GDP? I mean, I've seen very, very conflicting numbers. It'll be good to get a sense from the panel on where we should focus our attention on.
Okay, thanks. John, let's start with you on healthcare, because I think you've done a bit of work there.
Yeah, so actually, we're gonna be releasing a healthcare report pretty soon from our research arm. I mean, I think that it's really kind of interesting, as some of the other panelists mentioned. You know, when it comes to biotech, China is definitely a lagging behind the United States. And you know, in general, the healthcare system in China is not amazing. I'm currently in Hong Kong, but I lived in Beijing for 12 years, mostly using the public healthcare system while I was there. And I mean, again, this is one of those areas where I think China is very, very smart, both on the policy side, but then also on the implementation side, where what you see is this increasing desire or enthusiasm to use consumer technology in other areas. I think and healthcare is exactly that. And so you see these technology giants, which again developed and grew by satisfying consumer demand, and they're using those similar tools in healthcare, in providing other government services. And I think that to Professor Sun's point about the ecosystem, that's one of the reasons that the ecosystems that these tech companies have built is exactly that reason why it can be used in so many different contexts, and especially healthcare. So you look, I mean, telemedicine obviously is one of the big things. And so, you know, in China, what you can do is you can go through Alibaba's ecosystem, you can go through Tencent's ecosystem, talk to a doctor for 5 to 10 minutes, and get a diagnosis, and then, you know, go through the same ecosystem to purchase your medicine. So you never actually have to leave the home. I do want to point out, however, that there is, I mean, I think that I feel like I kind of have to, you know, just kind of give a bit of a moderating voice, because I think there is a tendency to overhype or to overestimate some of the innovations that we do see in China. So for example, contact tracing is one of the things that on the technology side, China has not done a very good job on, but they didn't really need to either. And so what you see in like the EU, for example, what we're seeing, you know, trying to apply in the US is, you know, using Bluetooth and NFC to you know, just basically to connect people, and then you can contact trace through there. In China, it was you know, very much pen and paper, to be quite frank. And so, you know, I think that again, you really kind of have to recognize that what we see most of all in China is this overriding enthusiasm and willingness to apply currently existing technology to solve these problems. But at the same time, there's still a lot of manual labor going on behind the scenes.
Okay, John, let's move now to the size of the digital economy. Deborah Campbell, any sense of the size of the digital economy? Vizuki's question there.
To be honest, I don't have a size with me on the digital economy, so I don't want to make up a number. So I don't have that with me, to be very honest.
That's okay.
On that, I don't have that to hand, so can't
That's
answer
okay.
that one.
Have you, Professor Sun, your estimate, is there an estimate that you think is more accurate than others on the size of the digital economy?
Right, I read something. So the digital economy before the pandemic was 1/3 of the Chinese GDP, and also 1/3 the size of probably the US digital economy. So still we are not over there yet. But given the trend, everything was talking about, I think China is going to, this number is going to improve very, very fast. And especially given the recent government move in digitalize the currency, and they are adopt the blockchain strategies, and those will even make this pushing even further. Can I add 2 examples?
Sure.
To the healthcare thing. One thing is that example is the 平安好大夫, the example I put on my slides. So that shows a very good example. The original business model was very similar to Mad Doctor, that is, was developed in the United States. But I look at that original website, it was not developed fully. It's still kind of making appointment reservations. But you look at 好大夫, over the years, it's evolved to as efficient ecosystem for the healthcare industry. So that is why when pandemic came, very quickly, they can add more kind of online telemedicine. So that is a great example to show that there are lots of entrepreneurs driven, they're highly driven, they understand the consumers, and then eventually they're going to evolve into a very efficient ecosystem. Recently, I heard, I forgot the name, but investment kind of a project in China adopting blockchain. So to fulfill two functions in the healthcare. Number one, for recognition. So I'm sure, I want to make sure this person is really this policy holder. Number two is to prevent like abuse of the usage of the insurance. So basically, new technologies were adopted by entrepreneurs to solve new problems. So given this hunger, this is the spirit and also the push of the government, I think the number is going to grow very rapidly.
Sorry, can I?
Yeah.
I would just, I did find a number. It's actually and it's not my number, but the estimates are that the digital economy may reach 60 trillion by 2025.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Anita, just before we move to the next question, any comments on either of those points, the size of the economy or also healthcare? And I'd imagine that the use of AI is a critically important part of developing healthcare apps.
Yeah, this is actually an area that kind of excites people and worries people. I think on one hand, the connectivity, the telemedicine example, I personally experienced it. There was something, you know, I'm not sure about my son, but we couldn't even go out of the house. So using telemedicine is actually a marketplace. You can find doctors' rating with where they are seeing doctors, which hospitals they work at. There are actually stars, pretty much by Sanjia, by grades that you can select. Of course, the higher the grades are, the more money you spend. You know, from 5 minutes to 15 minutes, you want audio, you want video conversation. It's actually, I'm amazed how comprehensive and how easy to use those telemedicine platforms are. However, you know, everyone would have concern posting your data online when it comes to medical records, your personal situation.
Yes.
So what actually, on one hand, aside from doing investment, we actually have a technology arm called AI Institute. So we are actually working with the industry to set a new norm for data privacy issue. There is a new, kind of new algorithm called federated machine learning that is now being promoted and being recognized by the industry. Is going to be kind of the current solution so that each set of data, for example, you go to hospital, your data kind of sits with the hospital within its own domain. However, when it's done with the training, the algorithm is actually contributed to the cloud, to a central data set. So the federated way would ensure that patients' data are stored securely and locally, but the algorithms are shared. Because I would feel that healthcare is really an area that eventually people would benefit from each other. You know, if data is properly anonymized and properly federated to ensure that we have our privacy covered, however, you know, contributing to a greater good.
I mean, that is the key to the use of data in healthcare, isn't it? Is keeping it anonymous, federating the data, using the algorithm and keeping the personal data, just that private and personal. Okay, move on to the next question, Boon Kiat Teo. And after him, we will go to Alex Roberts of Linklaters, and after Alex, we'll go to Will Cavendish of Arup. But Boon Kiat Teo.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. My question has actually been answered by, it was the first question actually, and it's been answered by Professor Soon and Anita already in regard to the relative technological strengths of the US and China. I just have one thing to just maybe ask a question. In this case where things are decoupling between US and China, and in particular the fact that the US seems to be preventing Chinese students actually from doing higher education, do you think that it will affect the growing strength and technology knowledge of China in the future?
Who wants to take that one first? Professor, we'll go to you.
Because I work in this industry. So yeah, I'm very concerned because as a researcher, we are trained to be driven by curiosity. We just want to find out the truth, no matter what happened in the other fields. So in China, I think, yeah, because the researchers, they want to find out how to solve a problem. So if you decouple, and then it's going to prevent all the researchers to change their ideas. So yeah, and I think the US has a lot good researchers, but in some areas, China has a little bit, also have some to contribute. I think the whole world, the scientists, in an ideal situation, they want to work together. So for this fundamental research, I think it will be great. It's very important to have a collaboration. And
John.
So just one point. I think that it's important to remember that there actually is this pretty massive information asymmetry between China and the rest of the world. And this is especially true when it comes to research of all stripes. You know, some of the most respected and you know, some of the best journals, academic journals, are printed in English, and they're available online, you know, via subscription or through universities or whatever. And you have to remember that, I mean, a lot of Chinese academics, maybe their spoken English isn't amazing, but they can certainly read English, and so they're very able to keep up on the latest research. Obviously, there's a big difference between having access to the research and being able to work with other researchers, but I do just want to point that out, because I think a lot of people don't. I mean, it's obvious once you realize it, but you know, but because of this information asymmetry, Chinese researchers are much better able to keep up with the latest developments in the rest of the world than non-Chinese researchers who can't read Chinese, who don't have access to Chinese journals. So that's just one kind of small point that I wanted to make about when it comes to fundamental research.
Okay, let's move on to the next question now. And Alex Roberts of Linklaters, and after you, Alex, we'll go to Will Cavendish of Arab. Alex.
Hi everyone, thanks for the insight so far. I think we've heard a few comments on this, but I was just interested to drill down a bit more into what activities that you're seeing in China that the rest of the world could learn from, what things you think will translate to other regions of the world that will emerge from the pandemic. Obviously, China has come out first. A few things are already bubbling up there, but as other areas come out of the pandemic and go back to normality, to the extent we see normality again, what do you think other places in the world can learn from China?
Deborah, let me start with you on that one. What can the rest of the world learn from China as it emerges from the pandemic?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is trends that were bubbling up anyway are just being accelerated. And I would just point in depth to this whole point about traceability. That was becoming, for many reasons, either ecological, political, or whatever, that was becoming a big issue in terms of where is your traceability of your goods, how does your supply chain operate, and I think that is one of the big trends that I think is going to go from being a back office problem to being a front office problem post-COVID. So obviously very familiar with the UK and the shortages. We had the shortages in Hong Kong in January and February. We had them in also in mainland China, just foodstuffs and how to get to things. So I think you know, I know this was sort of, most people don't think it's the sexy part of the business, but this whole traceability of your goods. I think also with the political environment, the traceability of your product is also a big issue. So we see a lot of big China companies now insisting on full traceability of all of their components for whether they're used in the China market or overseas markets. So I think for me, the biggest impact, and I know people talk a lot about the consumer side, but for me, I think this whole traceability, ownership and quality of the supply chain is going to be a huge wave that people have to do. And they have to do massive investment. in it. Whether they as companies or companies that want to be part of a bigger end-to-end are going to have integrated supply chains. And I think that's going to require massive investment.
Okay, so traceability, supply chains, and ownership, transparency on that. Professor Sun, lessons that the rest of the world can learn from China as it emerges from the pandemic?
Right. So now China, yesterday I was reading some articles. Now Chinese consumers are again looking for luxury products. Okay, so especially now they don't have to travel, so they are also looking at the website of the overseas brands, and they said if I can save some travel costs, and maybe they're less they are less open. They're more open to the higher price. Okay, so that's some consumer side interesting things to watch. Now on the business side, I think digital transformation. I think all the companies realize that we have to triple our speed for digitalization. If we don't, we're not going to survive. Second is that another thing is the telework. So in China, because of the system built by many platforms, there's Ding Talk. So we can easily shift to kind of an online working environment, and the economy was not hurt that much, was the company's business operation. So this is something, how to build an ecosystem that prepare for future crisis and move people online, not only for purchase, for entertainment, but also for work. Okay, so China has built something like that. And logistics, China has lots of things to learn, to offer, like experiences to offer on last mile delivery, logistics. So how to make it more efficient. And telemedicine, I think this Hao Daifu is something I think is really, really interesting case study. And also education, I think in China, also online education, China has lots of experience to offer to the rest of the world. And all those innovations are done by entrepreneurs. Okay, so Anita?
Yeah, I would just add to a theme that actually we're keenly investing right now, just one word, automation. Automation, not just meaning like robotics doing everything, but just think about the business processes. A lot of processes are redundant. The driver that we see is the labor cost of China is definitely going up, and the extended months of lockdown make business owners realize a lot of times you can really rely on people coming to factories and coming to operate, because there are times that they cannot come. So I think the awareness of I hate to use the word to reduce human touch. However, this is actually one driver that we see from a traditional business trying to automate how they operate. So I would give example of a few companies. For example, one company that we invest actually told us that, well, instead of business going down, they actually grew by 50% during COVID, and they are serving really large traditional clients in energy, in petroleum. They are doing the IT transformation as well as AI real-time monitoring of all the operation in those big companies. We are also seeing accelerated demand. We invested in 4 top autonomous driving companies in China. Some of them are doing autonomous trucking, autonomous logistics, and I actually run a similar panel like today with those founders just a few months ago. They all told the audience that they are seeing accelerated demand from their clients because contactless operations and logistics are now in high demand. So I would give the audience the thought of automation. It may come in different forms and different solutions, but that's actually the big trend that's happening right now from the investment side that we are seeing.
Automation, really, really interesting point. John?
Well, I mean, I think we've kind of mentioned it in passing, and this isn't necessarily directly related to the topic for tonight, which is technology. But I do think it's really important to remember, or at least for me, one of the big takeaways of this pandemic is how effective big government actually can be. And I don't necessarily mean that that the rest of the world should learn one-to-one from China's political system. But I do think, the Western world in particular has really kind of, the government in particular has abdicated a lot of its responsibility. And because of that, especially in the United States, I'm an American, and because of that, I do think that that the West and America in particular was especially vulnerable to this pandemic. But what we've seen in China, on the other hand, is this mass mobilization from bottom up and top down in order to prevent this. And when it comes to the use of these technological tools, a lot of it is already there, existing. I believe, as Deborah mentioned before, because of pre-existing government policy that specifically encouraged innovation. And yeah, there was a lot of, I used to cover startups quite closely in China, and there were a lot of dumb ones. I think that the death rate of startups in China is probably the highest in the world, and for good reason. But this is kind of the overall kind of policy-led innovation, and it actually, again, there are a lot of startup deaths because of it, but it really does work. And so the government makes these policy priorities. A lot of local governments try to follow these policy priorities, also their own local priorities. They put money on the table. Entrepreneurs take it. They take the subsidies. They take the tax breaks. A lot of them go off and do nothing with the money, but there are serious people out there who take that money and they build something out of nothing. And I do think that this is something that the West can learn a lot from. Maybe learn from it and somehow control a lot of the waste that we see in China. But at the same time, I do think that the private sector in particular likes to take a lot of the credit for a lot of this innovation. But even some of the internet, for example, the internet was created through the United States government, and our semiconductor industry was created with a lot of help from the government as well. And so I think that's one of the big things that I think in the West that we've forgotten, is that the government does play an extremely important role in spurring innovation and creating a safe space, as it were, so that companies and entrepreneurs can actually do so.
Okay, John, thanks very much. Really interesting. Policy-led innovation. The West can maybe learn something from China. So go now to Will Cavendish of Arup. Will, thanks for your patience. And after Will, we'll go to Lawrence Casanova from Cornell University. Will.
Thanks very much. And thanks to the panel for great discussion already. I think, the numbers and the accounts of the speed of transformation in China in areas like consumer, mobile, fast-moving consumer goods, logistics, supporting those things is it's an extraordinary story and very impressive. I just wanted to sort of ask whether the panel felt that there may be some significant challenges coming up in stretching that into new areas, and a couple of things in particular. The first is around the world of infrastructure, cities and the built environment. Obviously in Arup, we work around the world, including in China, on that. And the challenge of digitizing energy systems, water systems, rail systems, a lot of that really core built infrastructure is very, very significant. And it's a very different one than sort of transforming an online experience or a consumer experience. And I wondered what the panel's thoughts were about whether China's going to be more or less successful in stretching digital into those sections of its economy, because all countries, I think, are facing quite a difficulty in doing that. And the second was around the emergence of these really super giant technology companies in China, like in other parts of the world. So obviously Ali, Tencent, PDD, JD, they've become behemoths. And we work with all of those, just like we work with Facebook, Google, Amazon, and so on. And they are quite strange organizations, as everyone appreciates who's worked with them. But also the bigger they get, in a way, the more disorganized they get, and in some cases they become an obstacle to the next wave of innovation. So I was just really interested in hearing the panel's views on accepted the amazing change that's taken place, but are there some real sort of boundaries or difficulties that China's going to face in transforming the remainder of its economy? And is it storing up some questions around the scale and size of some of these supergiant companies, and how China might think about tackling those, which is becoming an issue for us all around the world, I think?
Well, thanks. Two very good questions. The first one, Deborah, I'll come to you first. The first one is on digitalizing the infrastructure, the hard infrastructure, the difficult things such as smart cities and the like. And secondly, are the tech companies basically becoming too big and therefore, will potentially stall innovation?
Two very different questions, actually. On the first one, I think obviously we're, as you know, in the building, the rollout of 5G, they're really pushing hard. I actually think China will be ahead in the rollout of 5G in the way that it's doing in its cities. I think they are planning their new cities. For those of you being to Shenzhen recently and seeing, I'm intimately aware that they're planning the rollout of these smart cities in the building of these smart cities, right? And we all know that you can see a city emerge in literally months. And so I think they will push that agenda much faster than I think the rest of the world will be. So I do see it becoming a reality. I also think, to the other commentators' points, that I think one of the good things in China is this planned economy is once somebody says yes, it will happen. So the whole planning, if you're in the UK, can take 18 months to just put a new hole in the ground. That's not going to happen. So I do think I do see China actually being much faster adopter, will put the infrastructure in all areas of 5G and digitization. In terms of the big ecosystem companies, I'm deeply familiar with two big ones, but I think they're very different in the way that they're actually managed and their cultures within them. They have a lot of similarities. They're very attractive to new talent, but they are actually structured very differently. I think there's going to be emerging winners and losers in that ecosystem agenda as we go forward. I won't say which one I think is going to be a winner, but I think they are difficult to work with. But I think you just have to, for me, I think we've had to be very open and actually more trusting in the way that we do business. But I also will say that I think it's very easy. They're not all the same and they are managed very, very differently as companies. I do think, however, they are much more prepared to lose money than many of the Western companies in the investments they make. So their mindset of growth and then the money will follow is one that I think too many Western companies are examining the business case at length, and at which point the market has moved. So I think their innovation mindset of let's put something out there, build it, go, is still fundamental to them.
Okay.
But that would be my comment.
Thanks, very, very interesting. I'll ask you later which company you think will win and which won't. I won't do it in front of 200 plus people. Anita.
Just one thing to add to the first question. Actually, I worked in the tech industry for about 15 years before turning an investor. So I would say, by and large, the mobile internet-driven innovation is largely driven by the entrepreneurs and the investors community. Very limited policy intervention. Policy plays a hands-off role. You guys go build things. However, to the first question on infrastructure is definitely where government plays big. So just starting, I think, late last year and more prominently early this year, the government has announced a new infrastructure plan, 新基建. So the new infrastructure plan essentially includes several categories: 5G, data center, IoT, IIoT, industrial IoT, artificial intelligence. Those are the key pillars under a new infrastructure plan, the National New Infrastructure Plan. So fundamentally, the plan is to support China's economy to transform digitally. So, you know, China's economy has been pretty much composed by very traditional industries. However, now almost every industry has to think and transform digitally. And those are the new infrastructure government is going to invest heavy. So I would foresee that with a more concerted effort, with money put in, with mechanisms from public to private collaboration and public to private investment, the kind of infrastructural revolution and kind of the change. We all see how high-speed rail was built in China in the past 10 years. And I actually would use that to kind of extrapolate what would happen in other areas as well.
Okay, thanks, John.
Yeah, so I mean, a few different things. I think that number one, I mean, you have to remember, I mean, the policy planners, I mean, most of China's leaders have an engineering background. I think that's, to me, I think that just explains so much about the role that technology plays in China's economy. And when I say technology, you know, kind of to Anita's point, I don't necessarily mean what we call tech these days. I mean, just like tools, technology, the building out of infrastructure, the building of high-speed rail, the building of telecommunications and, you know, broadband internet networks and things like that. So I think that one of the reasons that we see so much enthusiasm for the adoption of technology on the government side is that it solves a lot of problems. It solves a lot of problems. Again, on the medical care side, right? There is a severe problem in the healthcare system with this centralization of resources. You know, in many cases, you know, the very best doctors are going to be at, you know, a very small percentage of hospitals, but they're going to be in cities like Beijing and Shanghai. So if you have, you know, a rare condition or something like that, maybe you have to travel all the way from, you know, Yunnan province to Beijing, and that's a huge distance. And in some cases, you know, the cost of travel itself is just not possible. Maybe you live in the same city and it takes, you know, 3 hours to get from your house to the hospital where you have to go see this doctor who specializes in something. So I think that, you know, it's one of those things. I mean, we look at blockchain, for example. Obviously, in a certain sense, Alipay a long time ago solved that trust problem between buyer and seller. Blockchain solves trust problems within the government, between just, you know, person to person, but also between the government and people. It makes it potentially makes corruption a lot easier. Excuse me. It makes detecting corruption and preventing corruption a lot easier.
Hey, just clear that up, John. Just be clear.
But it also makes preventing fraud a lot easier as well. And fraud and corruption have been huge problems in China. AI and automation, both in terms of diagnosis, so getting people into the hospital, getting them diagnosed quickly, or maybe even, you know, through telemedicine. So this is one of the really amazing things. And again, the biggest difference I see between China and my home country, the US, is that, you know, number one, there is this engineering background, whereas in the US, we're very legal minded. So two very different perspectives. Also in China, the last, you know, 30, 40 years, technology has been directly associated with an increased quality of life. And I think that's set to continue. Whereas in the West, you know, things are kind of declining, and technology doesn't really seem to be making things better.
Okay, Professor Sun, I'd like to come to you with the question on the big companies, the big tech companies, because you've talked a lot about some of the things they're doing and some of the numbers they're achieving. Are they going to become too big? Is it going to get to a point where it's the mere size of them and navigating them will make it too difficult to encourage the sort of innovation that you're reporting on now?
Right. So actually, that's a very deep question. So it's really for the policymakers to think through, for researchers to study. So because by the nature, all those tech companies are platform business models, they make money differently from manufacture of products. So basically they are data company. The more data they have and the more ways they can make money. We developed the 7 ways they can make money. So because of the network effect, this unique nature, so the bigger they are, the more economy of scale they can enjoy, and the bigger the data kind of a network externality they can enjoy. So by nature, they should grow. But will the bigger size like hinder competition? I think the answer is yes. Yeah, look at the Western world and China. China, whenever there's a new business model, there are at least 3,000 copies. So because of the competition, and then it spurs further this innovation. So maybe policymakers, researchers should really look at this field and then try to study whether we should regulate or try to regulate step in this monopoly. But by nature, they should grow big. Yeah. So another question is that the audience asked about moving forward. Digitalization, this is great, but is there any challenges looking down? Like if we look beyond the horizon, number 1 in China is that fundamental research to drive this digitalization moving even further. Okay, now it's application, fundamental research. The number 2 is that, so no matter how big is the valuation of the tech company, they only provide one thing, it's the information service provider, okay? They only improve efficiency and to let people make better decisions. Like Ali, they only have an app, they only have an application or software. The most important thing is that technology should serve the people. So Chinese people still need good quality baby formulas. So the thing is that, so how to use technology in order to make people live a better life, have a higher quality products, that's something probably the policymakers should also think, especially when we switch to this dual kind of a circular economy, manufacturing becomes more important, right? In order to manufacture the best product, to move technology moving forward, you need skilled workers, which China is losing lots of skilled workers. You need the mentality of craftsmanship. Then you can build a global brand. Okay, yeah, those are my quick thoughts.
Thank you very much. Look, I'm afraid we're out of time. In fact, we've run slightly over. So apologies to Lourdes. I was going to come to you for your question. I'm really sorry we've run out of time. And apologies to those others who wanted to ask a question. I mean, really, my screen's gone crazy with requests to ask a question. We could have gone on for another couple of hours, but we do have to leave it now. Just remains for me to thank our speakers, John Artman, Anita Huang, Deborah Campbell, and Professor Sun. Thank you all very much. A really breathtakingly interesting conversation, and one which I'd like to reconvene in a few months because this is moving so very rapidly. I think it's going to shift pretty quickly. Thanks very much to CKGSB for partnering us in this event. Always great to work with you. Thank you to all of you who joined and listened in. Grateful to have you here. Do take care. We'll be in touch very soon. Have a good day, evening, and we'll see you soon. Goodbye for now.